Welcome to Kmet Manifest Introduction to Religion, Part 1. Today we'll discuss the Kmetic religion, what it was and what it wasn't, the entities that we'll talk a little bit about the Neteru, the entities that the Kmetu people acknowledge and who are often referred to as the Egyptian gods by modern Egyptology. If it's your first time around at Kmet Manifest, we put out content every week on questions revolving around ancient spiritual knowledge, Kmetic Paganism, and Kmetic history. Join our community by liking, commenting, sharing, and subbing to this channel so you never miss any of our new content. By the way, feel free to also read up the actual article posted on our blog. The link is in the description. All right, now back to Ancient Kmet Religion. When most people come across any knowledge about Kmetic Neteru, they're presented with the Egyptian divinities, an amalgamation of glyphs and stories, bringing out the interpretation of Western academic called Egyptologists. Pardon the quote, this is a term we're still coming to grips with and trying to figure out just where to put in our universe. Much of these interpretations are heavily constrained not only by Western and Judeo-Christian paradigms, but frankly also by a sense of simply not knowing what the heck was going on in this world they were meeting. A few centuries later, we're left with heaps of reports of a complex but confusing religious system full of fantastic gods and goddesses. Well, Western Egyptology has a clear lineage, and it seems to have started with good old Herodotus. But how many more had accounts of ancient Kmet BCE, some even contradicting Herodotus' conclusions? There were a few in his times as well as later, and up to this day, from Thucydides, who dismissed him as a simple storyteller, to Plutarch, Plato, and Cicero. Our lineage is different, and as such we had to cut Herodotus some slack on one account, Shehontas. In spite of the rumors about Herodotus not having sailed down the Nile, Shehonta Job rightly points that Herodotus always includes a disclaimer and talks about events noting whether he had witnessed them himself or he had been told. Okay, this may not be considered stellar scholarship, alright, but I think we're on the right track. Second, only relevant parts of his accounts of the people, events, geographies are reflected in the next 2,000 years of Egyptological narrations and elucubrations. Even if we were to consider his account reliable, well, let's do that actually. The majority of his observations is simply not reflected in the subsequent 2,000 years of Egyptological BS, and would stand more in line with our beliefs than that of legions of modern Egyptologists. So in this video, we're going to try to avoid some of these paradigms while clearing some of the confusion about some of the most frequently encountered Neteru. Okay, there's a predicament and there are limitations. As you might imagine, the situation we describe above led to a number of problems, and it isn't easy to navigate. If you take a look at some of our articles, videos, or even some of the products we sell, you'll notice that we keep going from one version to a Neteru name to another. We might refer to Inpu and Anubis, Oset and Isis, Osar and Osiris, when we're talking of the same entity. Throughout ancient Kmet's long history, the Neteru themselves took different attributes during different periods. Let me explain. Bastet might have been a warrior deity during the Old Kingdom, riding alongside her sister Sekhmet. By the Ptolemaic period, however, she had already adorned entirely different attributes and was already more sex, joy, and rock and roll than she had been in the past. Our overarching point, I suspect, is the following. There are no ancient Kmet writing texts that were categorized by the Kmetu themselves as religious, funerary, sacred. Western academia gave the ancient Kmet texts arbitrary names such as the Book of This and the Book of That, divisions, utterances, spells. Western academia even decided that a certain book had a Theban version or this, that, or time period version. I mean, they came up with cleverer and cleverer assertions. For instance, Ptah was adored in Memphis along with Sekhmet and Nefertem, while Ra was only adored by those who adhered to the Heliopolitan or Osirian triad. Oh wait, let's not forget the Theban triad of Amun, Mut, and Khonsu. If you thought they came up with three main triads of gods with their cult center, you'd be off the mark by quite a bit. I've alone encountered another dozen with different triads of gods, so when I saw a temple cult at Crocodilopolis, I couldn't help but smile and think of Sobek. It is after all this manufacturing and storytelling of their own that many Egyptologists, coming face to face with contradictory evidence, concluded that the ancient Kmetu had to have been mistaken or misguided when they gave us their own accounts of their cosmogony and beliefs. For ease of reference, we'll keep mentioning the common but arbitrary Western academic categorization of ancient Kmetic texts, even though the ancient Kmetu themselves never did. Now, an important question about religion in ancient Kmet. Polytheism, monotheism. For much of the past 2 millennia, so much has been written, asserted, and repeated about the polytheistic nature of ancient Kmet's religion. Now that we have survived that, let's be crystal clear, far from being of primitive, polytheistic form, ancient Kmet's religion might have been the most beautiful and the highest expression of monotheistic mysticism the world has ever seen. As Egyptian-American scholar Mustafa Gadala puts it, it is as valid now as it was valid then, for the truth is eternal. The word name God does not by itself tell us anything. To know God, to know the numerous attributes, qualities, powers, actions of God. The Kmetu regarded the universe as a conscious act of creation by the one supreme power. The fundamental doctrine was the unity of the deity. This one God was never represented, really. It is the manifestation of the functions and attributes of the one great God that were represented. Once a reference was made to any of such function attributes, it became a distinguishable agent reflecting this particular function, attribute, and its influence on the world. The various functions and attributes were called the neteru. In singular form, it'd be neter, and netert in the feminine form. As such, an Egyptian netert was not a god or a goddess, but the representation of a function or an attribute or power of the one God. As an introductory video on Egyptian religion, it's best to not overwhelm ourselves with several of the concepts of ancient Kmet's religion. Instead, what we intend to do is commit an entire category of our blog to Kmet's cosmogonies, spiritual and religious expressions. In our next blog post and on the part 2 of this video, we will be discussing some of the most persistent myths that have continued to blur understanding of the ancient spiritual system. But it was important for us to first dust off the ground and get out of the way some of the entirely flawed views of what religion was in ancient Kmet. It wasn't adoration of multiple gods, it was adoration of one. Akhenaten was not a heretical pharaoh or the first monotheist, and the list goes on. We will dive deeper into each one of these questions, but in the meantime, feel free to revisit some of the concepts we discussed in the blog post on our blog.